Hey, we are back. Another episode of the Missoula Podcast. Stephen Ressett, how are you?
I'm well, Brandon.
Both coming in
You
the
came
exact
in,
same time.
You came in hot.
Yeah, we probably should better script this and know who's going to talk. But
It's all good. Speaking of hot, it's hot outside.
What is going on? I do not remember
Ooh.
consecutive days like this in Montana.
I know, dude. August is going to be brutal.
And water levels are down.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you been to the river at Lake? Have you been?
Yeah, there was like a million people on the Clark Fork last week when I was out there. It's actually pretty cool to see tubers as far as the eyes could see. Have you got on the river at all?
I have. I got a quick story if you have time.
Yeah.
Last week, my family was one night we were like, hey, it's hot. Let's go down to the river. So we decided to go to McClay Flat, and we park, we take the little trail, we go down to the river and cross over to the island, and water level is pretty low. And so we set up some chairs and we're hanging out, and I'm standing in the middle of the river talking to my wife and daughter who's sitting on chairs on the beach. And my son is like 40, 50 feet upstream from me, and talking to my wife, and I hear my son scream, and I turn and look, and I see this rock in the air, like the size of a baseball, coming towards me.
Oh no.
And then I lose it in the sun. It's like 6, 7 o'clock. I mean, the sun is off in the west, and I put my arm up to shield myself, and rock hits me, just drills me in the wrist, breaks the skin, got a little bit of blood on my arm, and I'm just like, So I rinse my hand in the water and think it's sore. I got hit by a rock. I'll be fine. When we went to leave, I went to pick up my wife's chair and couldn't lift it. And so the next day went into bone and joint, got x-rays, and fractured my wrist. And so,
well, this is a public service announcement to be safe.
Be safe on the river.
And your son's got a cannon.
Yeah. No, I told him if he could hit the strike zone like that, I'd appreciate that. But no no malicious intent. Like prior to that, we were just boys in the river throwing rocks and having fun, and throwing rocks towards each other, just trying to splash. And we were just skipping rocks. And he didn't realize that I turned my attention away from what we were doing and was talking to my wife. And it was just, it was an accident, but he felt terrible, and I'm fine. I'll be okay. Could be way worse. So, but yeah, it's been hot, and the river's amazing, and so cool just seeing so many people, like you said, out there. But
well, speaking of sons, I'm excited for today's episode with Mike Hyde. And Brandon, can you tell our listeners a little bit about our conversation, what to expect?
Mike Hyde from the Cash Hyde Foundation just shares with us just a tragic story that many of you may recall. It was very front and center in Missoula several years ago. But just the tragic loss of his son, Cash, and the foundation they've set up to help continue his legacy and impact the lives of others. So you might want to grab a box of Kleenex for this, but let's take a listen. Here's Mike Hyde.
I'm Mikey Hyde. I'm right here from Missoula, Montana. I've been in the Missoula area since like 1994. Grew up in Potomac, lower Blackfoot area. And so like I always tell everyone, like, man, I was raised on the Blackfoot River. My mom would literally drop us off at Roundup, and Dad would pick us up at John's Root in the evening. And we'd spend about 6 to 7 hours basically just surviving on the river, like when we were like 11, 12 years old.
That's good parenting.
Like, my mom had no idea where she was dropping us off at. It was like the best like childhood to grow up like on the river banks.
It's crazy. I was at the river this weekend and thinking about like our childhood and how I'm watching our 3 kids like take off down the bank, and they're gonna jump in and then float down. And I was like, I'm there as a parent, and I'm like, is like our youngest, is she okay at 10 years old? Is she gonna make it? But it was exactly that. When we were kids, it was just, you just go.
It was the 80s. It was the 90s, man. There was no cell service. Like you kind of just let life take its course. That was how we grew up, was right on the, the Blackfoot River. So very, very like integrated into the Missoula ecosystem. And I had the opportunity where we were from Potomac, so a lot of our friends went to Hellgate. However, I ended up going to Sentinel And so I had friends from Hellgate, Sentinel, Big Sky, and we're all getting ready to turn 40. And so as I go around town, it's like I'm watching all of my friends and everyone like starting to turn into grandparents, some of them.
It's
And I'm like,
crazy.
what the heck? What's going on here?
Well, you look good for almost 40.
I tell you what, like I was blessed.
So yeah, you grew up in Missoula. Did you go to school after Sentinel? Did you go to college, or what was?
Man, like when I was right out of high school, I was really big into cars. My dad had a diesel shop, and so I was going to auto auctions when I was 18, 19. I started my first car lot. And so all my friends either went to like trade school, college, the oil fields, were framing houses. And I really liked the idea of commission sales. And so I kind of got into car flipping right out of high school, 18, 19, started my first like car lot. And from there, we ran that a couple years. It was crazy. I look back on like all my milestones through business, and it seemed like something crazy was always happening in my timeline. So from there, I ended up going from the car business. My wife was in college at the time. She was going to get her RN. And so we had our first son, like right when I was 20 years old, like right before I was 21. So I was helping her get through college. I was raising my first son, running a car lot, and then I ended up going into working at Roseburg Mill, and that's like probably the darkest moment in my life,
Yeah.
next to like some of the other stuff that's happened, was just like working at the mill and trying to figure out like, man, like this does not resonate with me. And the mill's a good job for
Right.
a lot, like a lot of
Right.
people like depend on that income and stability. And for me, it was like I couldn't get out of there fast enough.
Yeah, and you're 21, 22 years old, still trying to navigate life, figure out who you are and a new baby, and
Oh yeah, and for our generation, it's like you needed to go to college, is like you always heard, and so like I felt like I was in this position where I couldn't go to college, financially or realistically. We had this kid, and so I needed to go to work, and so that landed me at the mill. I did that for about a year and a half, and then we started framing houses right as the housing industry was tanking. And so we were like part of the boom. Like half my crew was like in the boom in Bozeman, like making hands over fist cash, 04, 05, 06. When I stepped into it, it's like we were chasing paychecks. And so I ended up stepping out of building houses end of 06, going back into auto sales 07. And then at that point, we were in that recession era. And we decided to go back and open up our own lot because we were dealing with all types of GMAC financing, cash for clunkers was going, and there was this niche of buyers in that like $4,000 to $10,000 bracket that a lot of the bigger dealerships didn't want to deal with, and that's where a lot of the profit was sitting.
what was the dealership name, or where was it?
Yeah, we had Elk Hyde Motors, and we were right across the street from Pink Grizzly. The building's not
Okay.
even there
Okay.
anymore.
Okay.
Before we had it, it was Worldwide Motors,
Yep.
and then we came in and we revamped it and painted it. And did I probably died from asbestos or something before it's all said and done. But we did this like amazing remod on that building, and then I ended up going to Lolo, end of 08, and we had our lot across the street from the Tractor Supply.
Okay.
That's where we were at.
Yeah.
And we ran that lot all the way up until early part of 2010, and that's when my son was diagnosed with cancer, and we ended up shutting that lot down and going into this journey of fighting cancer with our son.
Yeah, let's dive into that. Let's go deep. Son diagnosed with cancer. At the time, this was your second child. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
Cash was our second child, planned too, by the
Okay.
way.
And at
Put a lot of work into that.
and at 2 years old, you guys got some of the most devastating news.
Yeah, when Cash was about 18, 19 months, he started getting sick. Little kids get sick. It was like February era, and so my wife's got a great relationship with the hospital and all the doctors there because she works there and her mom worked there. And so we had our pediatrician that we would take him to, and they kept diagnosing him with mono, is what they kept saying. Like, he's got mono, you need to let him rest. So this went on all of February and into March. And we brought him in a handful of times and it kept being mono. And it like deep in my soul, I knew something was wrong.
Sure.
Like I could hold Cash at night and I would just feel like he was dying, like like we were losing him, but like you didn't want to dwell on that thought. And so then we bring him back to the doctor, and the doctor would be like, "Oh no, he's got mono, he needs to rest." And this went on for like 2 or 3 months. And like it was just eating at my like conscience. Like I kept like dwelling on it. And then this one morning I I had a dream, basically. Had a dream that we were driving down an icy road. My brother-in-law was driving the car, and it was me and Cash in the vehicle with him. And it was like we were going along the shoreline of a lake, and it was icy, but it wasn't frozen all the way. And he kept getting distracted. And I'm like, "Hey, you need to watch the road. You need to watch the road." And he ends up driving us into the lake. And the water's coming up, and I reached in the back seat and I grabbed Cash, and I'm looking at the water and I'm thinking, can I swim in this water, or am I going to like drown? And as I'm sitting there contemplating what to do, the car floats up to the shore, and 4 people in blue appear, and I hand Cash out the window and I say, "Save my son." And they grab him from me, and I had this sense of relief, and I woke up. And I came upstairs, and Cash and my wife were sitting in the kitchen, and Cash was throwing up in a bowl. And I was like, something's not right. And my wife's like, "I know, I just got off the phone with the doctor's office. We got an appointment at 10. We're going to go back in." And I was like, "No, like we got to take him somewhere else. Like we're getting the same story from these guys. Like we need to go somewhere else." And she's like, "Well, I'm already scheduled. We're going to go in and I'll let you know." And I had to go to work. And I was like, "Well, if she says he has mono, like, like we're going somewhere else." And so my wife calls me about 10:30, and she's like, "Hey, like the doctor says he just has mono. We just need to let him rest." And I was like, "No." She's like, "I know, I'm on my way to the ER right now." I was like, "Okay, well, I'm leaving work. I'll meet you there." My whole life, there's a part of me where I just question things that other people just would just take at face. And I was just like, no, I don't trust her. And they're like, "Well," kind of snooty. They're like, "Well, short of doing a CAT scan, there's nothing else we can do today." And that's when I was like, "Well, then do a CAT scan." And so they go and do a CAT scan, takes about an hour, and they come back and they're just kind of like pasty white. And they're like, "Guys, like Cash has a 4 centimeter tumor in his brain. And like we got to get you guys out of here right now. Like you guys need to go to Salt Lake or Seattle, but we can't facilitate this anymore." And so they're like, "We already called Life Flight. Where do you guys want to go?" And we have family in Salt Lake. And so we're like, "Well, we'll go to Salt Lake." So about 20 minutes later, Life Flight shows up, 4 people in blue come in. I hand Cash to them. They strap him to the gurney, and Callie and Cash life flighted to Utah. And my son, who was like 4 at the time, Colton, my oldest son, Colton and I remember leaving the hospital, and we had to go home and like pack some bags to get there. And it was the like most daunting moment. I didn't know what to do. And my dad called me, and he's like, "I'll drive you guys. My mom's going to follow." And so they all met us at her house, and we take off. It's like 6:30 in the evening. And we're like driving through Bonner, and I'm crying, and my dad's driving, and we're over by Rock Creek area, and my son reaches up and he touches my shoulder, and he was like, "Hey, Dad, like Cash is gonna be all right. We got this. We're gonna be okay." And it kind of like slapped me a little bit, because here I am, I'm a grown man, and my 4-year-old son is consoling me as we drive to Utah to go be with his youngest brother, who just got diagnosed with cancer. And that's when I was like, that was kind of like my oh shit moment, where I was like, "Hey, I gotta get my stuff together right now." And like I had my dad pull over, and I was like, "I'm gonna drive. Like I got this." And like so he hopped in with my mom. I took over, and like Colton and I did like 110 miles an hour to Salt Lake that night. And that was like this moment where I look at my son, and he's 19. He'll be 19 in September, and he's just been such an amazing human despite all these things we went through. Like I was 20. I didn't know how to be a dad. Like,
Sure.
you know, everyone was like, you did such a great job raising him. I'm like, dude, he raised me, man. Like, let's be honest,
Wow.
you know? And so that day it was like May 3rd, 2010. Like it's when like everything changed and we went into like a battle of a lifetime as a family and we didn't know what that looked like. All I know is when we got to the hospital, we're on the oncology floor at Primary Children's in Salt Lake City, and it was like a whole new reality. You know, you got a bunch of little kids with cancer. So everywhere you look is a little kid, little boy, little girl, bald head. And I mean, there was this one little kid though that I remember seeing. He was just tiny and he was beating cancer. And when I seen him, I was like, man, that could be Cash.
Yeah.
We can do this. Like, so I think what I like to remind people of as we go through hardships is is your first day of a hardship could could be a pivotal moment for somebody else's worst day.
Yeah.
And as you transition to day 1, day 2, day 3, week 4, like other people's day ones is starting and they're watching. And that's how we can fight cancer. It just through example of how we're going through the battle for everybody that's going to follow.
I'm assuming these are all life lessons you learned on the other side. In the moment, you probably didn't see it that way.
In the moment, and that's why I got all tattooed up. Like in those moments is when everything's so clear. Like in those moments is when everything makes perfect sense. Like there's no like you're not confused. And it's the days after those moments is when things get blurry.
Mm.
It's 2 or 3 weeks after that traumatic like thing that happened that you start like being numb to the things that you were acknowledging in those moments. And so for me, when I tattooed myself, I never wanted to forget those moments. So I'm reminded of it every day. Like, because even though I went through some traumatic stuff, as you move forward from it, it's easy to displace those feelings.
Yeah.
And especially the way my mind deals with stuff, if I don't, out of sight, out of mind. And so for me, like when I had the tattoos, it was to never forget like those moments, and to two, never be in an environment where like people's standards of what you look like, what you dress like, who you are as a human, like can affect your professional life. And so like as I went into real estate with long hair and tattoos, I was the underdog.
Sure.
And I was able to step in and show that like, yeah, the underdog can still be number one. The underdog can come in with a gym bag and still like pick up and run circles if needed. Right. And so it was just mindset for me.
So you guys get to Salt Lake, you see that there's cancer everywhere, just kids, just heartbreaking situation upon heartbreaking situation. What was next with Cash?
Well, with Cash, like he had a peanut brain tumor. It was stage 4, highly aggressive, malignant, part of the blue cell cancer group. And so they wanted to do like a regular base level of chemo for 3 rounds. And then they wanted to do 3 rounds of aggressive high dose chemo. And so like chemo has different levels, and the high dose chemo is completely different than the low dose chemo. And it's so aggressive that it kills every cell in your body, good, bad, everything, to the point where you hit 0. You're actually dead. You just don't know it yet. And that's when they do stem cell rescue. And so Cash was fortunate in the fact that he was able to use his own stem cell rescue. So they actually, like in between they did the first 3 rounds of chemo. And then after that, they give him these drugs that cause the bone marrow to come out of your bones. It's really painful. But it causes all your bone marrow to come out of your bones into your blood. And then they're able to collect it through a machine, and then they give it back to you. And so when we first got to Salt Lake, Cash was he was on death's doorstep. He was blind. He couldn't see. And I mean, he was sick. And so when they gave him the initial doses of chemo, it instantly started shrinking that tumor, which caused his eyesight to come back. So the first couple, like the first month was almost like, oh man, I'm so glad we got him here.
Yeah.
Like where he could like not be suffering from mono at the home. And so we got through the first 3 rounds, and that's when we did the stem cell rescue, and then we went into the high dose chemo. And the high dose chemo was just a crazy roller coaster. And throughout the first 3 months, I mean, we had several instances where the mistakes were happened. They gave him the wrong dosage of chemo. They overdosed him on fentanyl. So it was like it was a roller coaster of ICUs, comas, overdosage. I mean, it was just a wild ride the first like 90 days we were there, and we were living at the hospital in our camp trailer.
Uh-huh.
And so my wife and I, we divided the day up. Half of the day I would stay with Cash. So we do a 24-hour block basically.
Uh-huh.
So one of us would go with Colton, our oldest son, and the other one would stay at the hospital, and we would just switch over every morning at like 7 a.m. when the doctors all switched out. So we just did 24-hour blocks. And so that's kind of how we lived, was in these 24-hour chunks. When we started the high dose chemo, like that was the last day Cash ate. Like it was mid-August. I think it was like August 17th, 2010. We're at the hospital. We're getting ready to start the high dose chemo. I get a phone call from the Missoula Sheriff's Department, and they're in Potomac at our grow where we were growing medicine for Cash. And they told us that they were going to chop down all of our plants. And I was like, please don't do that. That's my son's medicine. We've been working on it all summer. And so my good friend was back home, like growing the medicine for us. And they're like, well, we can't get a hold of your friend and we're here. And so the sheriff department was like, we're going to chop these plants down. And I was like, please don't. And we need those plants. And they ended up chopping all the plants down. And that was the first time like in this journey where I was doing my best to listen to what the doctors were doing my best to follow all the rules. Like we had gotten Cash's medical cannabis card in July of 2010. Not knowing what we were going to do with it or how that even looked, but I just knew I wanted to have every bit of arsenal for him in the journey. And so that was a huge blow. In August, we were starting high dose chemo. We lost all of his medicine that we'd had. We didn't, like, that was like 90 days in the making. And we were kind of at rock bottom. They started the high dose chemo. That's the last day Cash ate. And so we go through August.
Sorry, how long were you in Salt Lake at this point?
We'd been in Salt Lake since May 3rd. Okay. So it's like August 17th. Okay. And so we basically were watching this high dose chemo, and it's so aggressive that you got to bathe the patient like 3 or 4 times a day to wash the chemo off, because they're sweating it out and it's burning their skin. And you can't have any bandages, because the bandages it'll like literally burn your flesh because it got to escape out. And so you think of it like a 2-year-old wearing a diaper. Basically, like you got to keep that stuff going, or else it can get really, really, really bad. So it was probably the first part of September. We've gone about 3 weeks. Like at this point, he's living solely off of TPN nutrition, which is a IV drip of nutrients they give you when you can't eat no longer. And so we're basically like 3 weeks into this battle now of the high dose chemo. Cash is not eating. He's throwing up 10, 11, 12 times a day. And that's when we sat down with the doctors and we're like, hey, I'm really concerned about Cash.
Sure.
And the doctors were kind of just there. I mean, the one thing that's nice about doctors is they're just blatantly honest, at a certain point. And they're just like, look, guys, your son's got stage 4 cancer. You're using high dose chemo and stem cell rescue. And he's been on TPN and lipid nutrition for the last like 3.5 weeks. We're at this point, we're no longer fighting cancer, we're fighting organ failure. And the reality of it is Cash is most likely going to die from drug overdose or organ failure, because we're giving him max amounts of narcotics for nausea and pain. and the TPN nutrition is going to kill his kidneys and his liver. And so that's when we were like, well, if you're telling me that he's going to die from organ failure and drug overdose, then let's start weaning him off of these drugs. And they were like, we can't wean him off of these narcotics. He'll go through withdrawal, and that's not part of our protocol. And I was like, well, you just told me that your protocol was going to kill him.
Yeah.
So we need to change the protocol. And that's the biggest thing. Like when people ask me like, well, what, like, how would you classify yourself? Like before I was a realtor. And in this moment in time, I was a child advocate, and children can't talk.
Right.
Children can't voice their opinion. And as parents, it's our role to do what's best for our children.
Yes.
And they'll even tell you that, like, if you're questioning what someone's telling you, a doctor, whoever, if it doesn't resonate with you internally, there's probably a reason for it. And it's your job as the parents, as the guardian, to be the child advocate and speak up for your children's behalf. And if I hadn't been Cash's advocate from day one, he would have died of mono. And that's what I was kind of fueled by, was the fact that I need to pay attention, because the doctors might not know exactly what they're telling you.
Right. They're doing their best, but
they're practicing, man.
It's your child.
They're practicing. And at a certain point, they were like, what we're doing is going to kill your son, and we're going to keep doing it. And I was like, no, we're going to stop. So I ended up driving home, and my brother, he was going to school to be a chemist at the time. And there was this guy out of Canada called Rick Simpson who made this Rick Simpson oil. And so with this oil is a very concentrated form of cannabis. And so I came home and I got this cannabis oil, and we got back to the hospital. It's real thick. It looks like honey or a wax. It's very messy. It's hard to dose until you know what your levels are and stuff like that. And my wife was a nurse, and she's pretty smart. And we're looking at it, and olive oil and coconut oil acts as kind of like a solvent to anything that's oil based. So we ended up getting coconut oil and kind of infusing the cannabis oil into the coconut oil for him. And that's when we came up with these, like, just a liquid form of this oil that we could put in his G tube. And so we got the doctors to agree to start weaning him off of the worst of the narcotics that they had him on at the time. And that's when we started sneaking cannabis oil into his G tube.
Now,
so they don't know about this.
They have no idea.
I was gonna say, I don't know a whole lot about cancer, the medical facility, but one thing I do know is cannabis oil in Utah is not a good thing.
It's highly illegal. It's a felony, depending on any state you're standing in. Like, it's a felony.
Huh. Wait, and this is years ago. This is before all the new. Yeah. So I'm thinking like current times. Like this is back when.
This is back when you didn't talk about kids and cannabis, or you went to jail. Like, it didn't matter what you were doing. If you were a parent and you didn't even mention cannabis, or you went into a dispensary and said, my kid's got cancer, they would tell you to leave. Like, nobody was having a conversation about child use and cannabis, right? And so I didn't know how much to give him. I didn't know any of that. But what I did know is I couldn't kill him with it. And so we go to the hospital. We got this oil. We're now sneaking it into his G tube as they're like taking him off of some of these narcotics, like small doses, backing it off. And at this point in time, Cash was only sleeping like 15-minute increments. I bet all of us were probably averaging about maybe 3 hours of sleep per day in 15-minute increments, because you got bells, whistles, this, that, nurses coming in. You're completely like living like around all these other humans, like in a little hospital room. You have no privacy. And so not only are we scared for Cash, like now we're scared for like our safety. And I was mostly concerned for my other son, because he like if I get in trouble, he's going to go to Child Protective Services.
Grow up without a dad,
Mom.
City. Yeah.
And so the first night we gave him this medicine, he slept 8 hours.
Whoa.
Like 8 hours, dude. Like, as a parent, as a caregiver, when you can give someone that you care about relief like that after you've watched them suffer for months, and you can give them like just the gift of like sleep, like I was like, oh my God, this is amazing.
Did that create some questions from the medical team?
No, they were
Right.
they had no idea what we were doing. We were
Right.
completely like, you didn't ask. Well, I did. I did ask, but I got shut down right away. So from the day one, when we showed up at the hospital, I asked them, like, what about this? What about that? And if you even brought up anything to do with cannabis, they would tell you, hey, we're federally funded. That's federally illegal. We can't have this conversation. And I'd be like, well, I want to have this conversation.
Sure.
Like I want to have an honest, like educated conversation. And you're telling me that you won't have it. And instead, they're like, "Oh no, we're federally funded. We can't talk about it. Your son can overdose on our narcotics.
It's all about money at
or
this point.
whatever." Yeah, it was the craziest thing. Well, he hadn't eaten in 3.5, 4 weeks, so they weren't even giving him like tube feedings anymore. His stomach was so fried from the chemo that the epithelial lining of his stomach could no longer absorb nutrients. So there was like they couldn't even run his tube feedings, right? So. And he hadn't asked to eat. Like when someone quits wanting to eat, like it is a scary situation because I mean you die. If you don't eat, you die.
Mhm.
So like like Cash hadn't wanted a bite of food in 3.5, 4 weeks at this point in time. He wakes up and he asked for some food.
Wow.
And so we go get him order him a grilled cheese sandwich, and he takes a couple little nibbles out of it, and we're just like all standing like, what? So this goes on for about 2 weeks. And in this 2-week time, Primary Children's Medical Hospital is all documented. They weaned him off of every nausea and pain drug that they were giving him, which was a pretty long list. And they kind of like laugh about it. And then one time they made a comment. They said, gosh, Cash is going to be able to party like a rock star in college with the amount of narcotics he can handle. Because he's on max amounts of every narcotic we can give him. And I'm like, I'm not happy about that.
Yeah.
Are you and your wife at this point like not trusting any of the doctors?
I didn't trust any doctor. Like honestly, like,
and that would have to be hard for her because she's an RN. Or is she just completely like,
we're in it. We're wanting to trust. We're wanting to just keep our kids safe.
Mhm.
And at the same time, like I can't take my guard down.
Yeah.
Because he can't talk. Like he can barely communicate. And mistakes happen. Like one day I watched they came in with one of their medical students to give him to flush his G tube, and they put the fluid into the ball that holds it in and ruptured it and caused him serious injury. And I was like trying to stop it. This one day they gave him fentanyl. It stopped his heart. No, so I'm watching the stats drop. The doctor gives him another dose of fentanyl. He flatlines. So now they're trying to resuscitate him, and the doctors are all like freezing up, and we're in the ICU, and they got the whole like medical center outside, and they got the airbag on him. And my instinct is I need to bag him. Like I don't know what that even means, but like at this point, I see a bag on the end of the mask, and they're all standing there. And he's flatlining, and I'm literally jumping over the bed to squeeze that damn bag as the doctor was like, bag him now. And the nurse started squeezing it and brought him back to life. Like, so when you're like in moments like that, where you're like, oh man, if I am not paying attention, if we're not here at all times, like anything could happen. Right. And so what ended up happening is they weaned him off of all these drugs. And about 2.5 weeks into it, he had his first bowel movement that he had in over 6 weeks.
wow.
And it was his entire epithelial lining of his stomach came out, which was fried from the chemo. So when you think about chemo, it's like getting sunburnt really bad from the inside out. So just think about you get sunburnt and it pills and layers. That's all your organs. That's your entire epithelial lining of your stomach, all of it. And what happened was he passed all this dead cells out. Well, what happens is cannabis produces the death and discretion of dying and sick cells. And when you see it work, it was one of them. It was one of those things where it was like you had to be there, you had to see it, you had to be part of it. And because if you weren't, and it's just me telling you about it, it's like, oh man, it's not like you're a little like that weed a little much, Mikey. It's like, yeah, it's an amazing plant, but when you see what it can do, super amazing.
Yeah.
And
I wasn't in your shoes. So here, what I'm envisioning as hospital room and doctors and nurses is probably not even close to the reality of the tension and anxiety, up and down the halls and in that room. I can't imagine. Steven and I both have kids, and I just cannot imagine now at 40 being able to handle what you and your wife walked through.
Well, when you think about it, like we're sitting there, we're isolated on the 4th floor with a bunch of other families going through the same thing. And we're changing our son's trajectory, and we're watching other kids suffer. And I can't help them.
Yeah.
Because if I try and help anyone, I'm going to go to jail.
Right.
And Cash is going to lose his medicine. And my number one priority is making sure Cash got out of Salt Lake safe. Yeah. And so
you see Mike just hopping from room to room, just dropping in the
I wanted
G
to.
tubes.
Yeah. And so just like little things where we were able to step in and change his trajectory from day one, starting with getting him a G tube installed and getting him on cannabis oil and pulling him off all the narcotics. Basically, by the time we got through the end of 2010, he like one of the biggest side effects of stem cell rescue is pulmonary hemorrhaging. What was wild was the kit that they were using to clean his. It sounds like a horror story when I tell you about all the things that went wrong.
It is a horror story.
So the kit they were using to clean his ports and his pick lines and stuff, because you couldn't keep bandages over it, so they had to come in and clean it. It turned out that kit had a bacteria in it, got recalled. The water that we were bathing him in 3 times a day at the hospital, bacteria in it as well. And so Cash ended up getting a bacteria infection when he was at ground 0 in between round 2 and round 3 and of high dose chemo. And this bacteria infection, pulmonary hemorrhaging, everything happened all at once. And Cash went into a 30-day coma. And at this point, we couldn't give him any medicine. Yeah. He was pretty much, they told us he was going to be brain dead. And they were going to, so we're like 2.5 weeks into this ICU coma thing. And that's when their doctors were talking about like unplugging him. And I was like, look, dude, like we've been here fighting since May. Yeah. Like Cash hasn't gave up yet. And we're not giving up on him. Like you're going to keep him going. And we left the hospital, my uncle and I ended up going to this Catholic cathedral. I'm not very religious. I was baptized Catholic as a kid, but I had this feeling I need to go to this Catholic church, a big cathedral on the east side. Went in there and I prayed, and I just had this feeling like I need to get a priest to the hospital. And I can't find a priest. The church is empty. I don't know where the priests are. No priest there. We get back to the hospital and I push on the elevator. The elevator opens and there's this little priest all priested up. And I was like, I need you to come with me, dude, like right now. So I bring this priest to the ICU room with Cash. And I mean, if I had photos of that, I have photos. He's swollen, all like incubated out, like he's in a coma. And this priest comes in and baptizes him on the spot. And it was the most like spiritual like moment I can think of, where like the holy water's dripping down his face, and Cash pulled around after that. And we ended up leaving the hospital December of 2010. And Cash was dubbed the Boy of Steel and the Christmas Miracle. And they had no way of explaining how they were able to wean him off all the narcotics, for one, because that's like not possible. But they did it, and they documented it, and it happened.
And they thought they did it.
Yeah, they couldn't explain it. They're like, this is a miracle. Like we weaned him. They were like, you're right, Mr. Hyde. Like we were giving him all the side effects of the drugs they were giving him were nausea, but like all the symptoms that he had, like they were just making him sicker and sicker with this garbage. And so at the end of it, my conclusion was, and some people say that like cannabis can cure cancer. That's neither here nor there, but what it can do is act as a neuroprotectant and an antioxidant. And so if you or your loved one is going through any type of battle where they could have a stroke, or you're trying to rebuild their organs or anything like that, cannabis is probably one of the best like medicines that you can get in their path, because it acts as a neuroprotectant and antioxidant, and you can't stop their respiratory or their cardio. Like, you can kill your kid giving them children's Tylenol. It can literally stop their respiratory. Google how many kids die a year from Tylenol or aspirin, and we don't think twice about it. Like, kid's sick, give them some aspirin. Kids die every day from that. Like, and that's where, like, with us on our path, I was like, man, like, we got to tell these other families about this.
Yeah.
Well, what I noticed was a lot of parents, like a lot of humans are so worried about getting in trouble. And for some reason, Cash gave me this gift where I didn't have to care. Like, I didn't care about going to jail. I cared about my kid dying.
Yeah.
And so when I look back on it, and I use this analogy at Montana camp, it's like being at a pond that's federally illegal to swim in, and your kid falls in it and is drowning. Are you going to stand there on the shore of the pond and watch your kid drown because it's illegal to hop in there? Or are you going to hop in the damn pond and save your kid? And so we hopped in the pond. We saved our kid. We got back to the shore, turn around, there's more kids in the pond. And that's when I decided as a human, like, we had Cash home safe. We're out of the pond. And that's when I was like, no, I got to hop back in because I can't count on anybody else doing this. And if this means that I have to go to jail to let this be known, then that's what we're going to do. And so when we came, like, Missoula's news station, K-Pax, Jill Valley, those guys were amazing. Like, they documented our whole experience from the time we were diagnosed, the original fundraisers that were going on. Like,
you guys were all over the place, all over the news.
Missoula,
media,
Missoula is so amazing. Like, when I look back on, we never had to ask for anything. It wasn't until our third battle till we lost everything. Our first two battles, because we fought cancer for 2.5 years with Cash. He beat cancer twice. It was the third round that smoked him.
I mean, Mike, appreciate your just vulnerability and just opening up and sharing your story. I cannot imagine what you and your family have walked through. And I'm sure, 13 years later, it's still something that you think about constantly, daily, and wonder what life would be like, this last weekend if your little boy was there. Couple questions for you just before we wrap up. It's unfortunate, the tragic ending for Cash. Just walk us through those last days, hours of that third round with cancer.
It was, we call it like scan PTSD. Everyone that's fought cancer with someone or themselves, every 6 months you gotta go scan. And so as you get closer to those scan dates, it's when you start worrying. You know what I mean? Like, is it gonna be clear? Cash kept complaining that his stomach hurt. In June of 2012, we actually we were in Oakland for his birthday. We traveled, man. We were living life. We were in Oakland for his birthday, doing reggae runner drop-offs at the Oakland Children's Hospitals. And so we were down there with our really good friends and family. And we got home and he's complaining that his stomach hurt. And that's when we were like, well, it's time to rescan anyways. And that's when they scanned and his tumor was coming back for the third time. And so we'd already done high dose chemo. We'd done proton radiation. So every time you do one of those things, you can't do it again. Like, if a cancer comes back, it's now like mutated and it's even more aggressive. And so all of our options were out the window. We'd used the heaviest hitting things that you could on it. And so they were like, well, you got two options. One is hospice, or we can like try some experimental stuff with him that might buy you guys a couple months, but like, this is going to take him. And Cash was old enough at that time. He looked at me and he just said, no more pokes. And so I would still be fighting cancer with him today if he was still here. And he was like, no more pokes. And so we, as a family, we brought him home and we decided to make him as comfortable as possible. And we didn't need hospice because he didn't need morphine or anything. We were able to make, like, again, because of cannabis, we were able to help him be comfortable and out of pain. And we just, from July till November 14th, when he passed away, we just made him as comfortable as possible as a family. And the night before he passed, we ended up going to Darby and staying at some really good friends' cabin with them, and we stayed there that last night with Cash, and we came home, and Cash, you could just tell he was breathing hard. It was getting harder and harder on him, and because we were using medical cannabis and we weren't using hospice, like I feel we were alienated from the medical field on the third battle because of our choice of care. And so it was hard. It was a hard last day. But Cash, he fed himself. Like he wanted to eat Cheerios. He was very particular on how he did things, but he wanted to eat Cheerios out of a Ziploc bag, and he wanted to feed himself, and he did. And then that night we called our friends and family over. We're like, hey, you probably need to come up. I don't know what's going on. This doesn't like he don't look good. So all of our friends and family showed up, and I was holding him. I could feel it. I could feel his last breaths. And then I felt him pass, and I was holding him, and I felt like every bit of energy I ever gave him, poured into my body. And as I looked up to tell my family that he had passed, I felt him explode out of me across this whole universe, whatever this is that we're part of. I felt it it was the most amazing experience. So much so I wanted to go with him, man. It took me a few years to not want to not be here anymore.
Oh.
And so that night when he passed, it was a very pivotal moment in my life. If you have kids, you're there for them when they're getting born. Really amazing experience. And when Cash passed, the gift he gave me was abundant. And it's why I have such a drive. I've always had a drive, but I have a more of a drive now than ever. And it's for every little kid that doesn't get to experience all the things that we get to take for granted every day. And so when I get up at 5 a.m. and move, it's because I know there's so many little kids that would love to, but they can't. Oh. And we all have that. We all have that ability. We're all here for a reason. We're all here doing things. We're all in Missoula, Montana, which is one of those amazing places ever. And we have an amazing community. And I guess my approach is we can all do more. And so that's the goal of the Cash Hyde Foundation. It's what drives me every day to grow a big business, because the bigger we can take our business, the more lives we can change. And that's why I'm so proud to have the Cash Hyde Foundation. We're going on. We established in 2011. We 501c3'd in 2012. And so we're 10 years as a 501c3 now.
And I appreciate that segue, because I didn't know how to follow up what to say next with just the tragic ending of Cash's life. But the cool part is Cash's legacy is continuing and being carried on in Missoula, in our community. For those not familiar with the Cash Hyde Foundation, what is it? What are you guys doing? What's the impact that Cash has left behind?
We are a pediatric cancer 501c3. So our mission is to financially assist families fighting cancer, because the people always ask, well, how can you help a family? Money. They're not working. Parents aren't working. They're living out of a hospital. One of the best ways to help a family is to financially assist them, pay their mortgage payment for them, get them money so they can get gas or fast. When you think about living out of a hospital, let's say you're living in a hospital for 90 days. How are you don't have a stove, you don't have a house to prepare food in. So you're going to be eating out of cafeterias and restaurants. And if it's you, a spouse, and let's say another kid, it says 3 of you that are healthy, that are having to sustain, right?
Yeah.
And how hard is it to go get a meal for $10 each, right? So you're going to spend anywhere between $30, $50 a meal for 3 people, 3 times a day. For 90 days, you can rack up a huge food bill just eating garbage food. Yeah. It ain't even good food.
Right.
It's just it's oh man. So financially assisting families is one of the biggest things we do. We spread pediatric cancer awareness. And we do our Sportsmen Against Cancer banquet and Sportsmen Against Cancer grant hunts for kids and families that want to come and enjoy Montana's outdoors.
Cool.
And now that Kalispell has a pediatric cancer oncology department, so up until a few years ago, if you're in Montana and you had to fight cancer with your kid, you had to leave the state. Now there's more Montanans able to fight cancer in Kalispell and not leave the state than ever before.
That's nice.
And so because of that, we have more request assistance from the social workers up there. And so our foundation does a lot of just direct patient, like foundation to patient care. And it's challenging because I'd love to tell a lot of more stories of all the families, but because of HIPAA laws and confidentiality laws, we can't like name blast the families that we help. But last year, I think we helped upwards of like 17 or 18 families
Cool.
up in
awesome.
Kalispell.
Good.
And we do that through our Sportsmen Against Cancer banquet. It's how we drive most of the funds for our foundation.
Mike, to those listening before we wrap up here, if they want to learn more, get involved, where can they find you, the foundation?
You can find us everywhere. You can reach out to us direct at cashhydefoundation.org. We'll bring you directly into our hub, into our ecosystem. You can call me 406-370-0091. You can get us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. We're everywhere and we're available and we're always looking for support.
Yeah.
We're wanting to revamp our board of directors this year for 2023 coming up. And so we're always looking for volunteers for our events. We're always looking for people that want to come in and work on the board and help us help as many families as possible.
That's awesome. Stephen, any last comments, thoughts?
Yeah, Mike, thanks for coming in and sharing your story. And so sorry about what happened, but so amazed that there's a lasting impact and that you're advocating for so many people out there, and we'll do anything we can to help.
Well, I appreciate you guys getting me down here. Like I say, when we think about it, people have like 3 stages of death when they pass. You have the initial like passing. You have the last time anyone sees you and they shut the coffin. And then the third death is when people quit saying your name. And because of all of our amazing support that we have, like Cash's name gets said all the time. Like he's been gone, 11 years this year. And we're doing a podcast on him today. That's how big of an impact he had. And that's, again, one of the most amazing things about our community is like you guys are all helping us keep Cash's name alive, his legacy alive. And
this may be a
appreciate
terrible metaphor, but when you're talking about jumping into the pond and saving Cash, I just thought, I don't think it's a coincidence. His name is Cash, and the deposits that he's making into other people's lives are yielding an incredible investment. And like, I don't think it's a coincidence that the name Cash is being carried on. It's a currency that's moving through your organization, and just wish you guys nothing but the best. And like Steven said, we're happy to help in any way we can, and just appreciate you coming on, being here today.
Well, thanks, guys.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike.
Yep.